We are going to start again. Good afternoon to the EuroSea High-Level Symposium on Ocean Observing and Forecasting here in Paris, and hopefully also online following the panels for this afternoon. We're getting back on track to the final line with the panels here. And we don't want to only talk on stage, we would like to talk to all of you and with all of you. And I know you did some mingling, as Tosta used to say, in the morning already, and now also probably during the lunch break. But the panels are also exactly therefore. So whenever you feel like you're having a question, please raise your hand. So we'd like to get in touch with you and talk. We'd like to keep it a bit relaxed. I know that you had 3 days of input already, and but let's say, let's do some mingling on the panels here today. We start with the first round table, the ocean in the climate system, extremes, hazard, and potentials. And we're going to listen to a keynote from an oceanographer specialized in ocean climate monitoring, working at Mercator Ocean International in France. Please welcome Karina von Schuckmann.
So, hello everybody, or for those who made it back from the lunch break, right? So I wanted to give some words to introduce this session on this very important topic. So one of our major challenges, and we are in a time of climate emergency, is on the ocean and the climate system, and here linked with extreme hazards and potentials. And we had several calls this morning in terms that we need knowledge. So I will start this presentation with very clear and simple messages. So my first message is in terms of knowledge put together from so many scientists as part of the IPCC. So here, my first message is that the scientific evidence is unequivocal, it's clear. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. So here it is expressed in terms of having a risk assessment for the ocean ecosystems. And you can see here the different colors. So you have a color assessment in yellow, which is indicating that we are able to attribute changes in the climate system, and we are able to detect those changes. That's yellow, and it's medium risk. Then we have high risk. High risk means that these implications are getting severe and that they're getting widespread. And then we have the dark yellow in the so-called burning amber diagrams, which means that we are at very high risk. High risk means that it's partly irreversible, that it's permanent and persistent, and that it's very severe. So with the example here for some of the major aspects for the ocean, you can see in gray line, that's where we are now. So it's about 1.1 degree. And then you see the next close line, which is 1.5 degrees. And then you have 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4, 5 degrees. So you can see that for some of those, we are already in a so-called medium risk. So we detect and we observed, and that's what we are all discussing. But for some, we are already at a place where we are in a severe state and a persistent state. So every action is needed, and we need to be aware on this information. So that's another message I wanted to bring from IPCC. It's a message of the role that we are committed to climate change. And so there are some Earth system components where the change is already irreversible for 100 to 1,000 of years. And one of these components is the ocean, such as, for example, the deep ocean warming. So it's another message to say that climate change is emerging and is there, and so that we have to take urgent adaptation as well in a serious manner. So what we need for this is, again, to raise the awareness on the really critical and important role of the ocean in the Earth system, not only for the environmental aspects, and I just gave you some examples on the assessments on the climate knowledge we have today, but also for the other 2 pillars of sustainable development, so society and economy. And this is just an overview of some of the critical roles, but we have to raise this awareness and understand that these implications on the environment are severe and are emerging and will continue to emerge. So we also have the opportunity that the ocean is rising higher in the political agenda. And so this is just an overview on some of the different key aspects and the so-called ocean and climate nexus with conventions, with sustainable development, governance agreements and treaties putting in place, and where knowledge, science-based knowledge on different knowledge systems is really the leveraging point in order to support these negotiations, policy, and also to take sustainable actions for the future. So then I would like to come back with this creation of knowledge through this. It's one of the representations we have heard several times today. So it's this so-called added value chain where we move from the raw data and add expertise and add processing and add implementations, go up to products, and from those products we add more expertise, we go higher up in this value chain, and then we go to indicators, we go to reporting, and then we move ahead in order to reach a wider audience, and then where we also start to cross the 3 pillars of sustainable development, and that this knowledge transfer is really the dialogue action we have to proceed and to strengthen in order to assure that this path will continue and to offer this knowledge transfer. Here are some examples from EuroSea, which have provided important aspects in terms of crossing these different dialogue leveraging points at the pillars. This is, for example, on the linkage of our knowledge in the physical biogeochemical system in terms of how the ocean is dealing with the carbon, surplus carbon in the Earth system, scaled down to a country level uptake and release of carbon, and then linked to economic value in terms of determining the prices and starting a dialogue in order to explore how policy, how this knowledge transfer can impact policy actions. Then this is another example in terms of how we can provide, for example, improved information in terms of seasonal forecasting for some economic sectors in terms of management activities, such as seasonal forecast of ocean extremes, where we have learned through the project linked also with different aspects in the environmental pillar, understanding that the ecosystems are not only affected at the surface, but also at the subsurface layer. And also we can see in the systems that the forecast skill improves when we include information on the subsurface layer, which is driving a new tool which would be able in order to improve for seasonal forecasting for ocean extremes in order to support management action at these layers. And then in turn, adaptation. Okay. And then there's a very short last one. We have heard this also as an example before in terms of using the information on the other aspect, on the hazards in terms of sea level extremes, and informing, for example, port authorities through a specific user-friendly tool in order to then deliver the knowledge we have, it seems, through a specific tool, and then directly in co-construction with the economic sector and also with port authorities, so societal sectors, to achieve a transfer of knowledge at the place where we need to have this information ready. So I wanted to, having task for 10 minutes, I would like to go out of this presentation with a message which was also, again, an assessment, which is out of my expertise, but it was working group 2 of the IPCC, and assessing what do we need in order to move the path towards a climate resilient future. And so there are clear recommendations, solution provided in this report, which are more detailed if you go into the report, but summarized. We need to reduce the climate risks, and we need to advance on the adaptation. We need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and so we have to continue with the path of mitigation efforts, enhanced mitigation efforts. We need to protect our environment and ensure that we have enhanced and healthy biodiversity, and to achieve the sustainable development goals. So how can we do this? One is to involve everybody, and this is through forming partnerships. One is to consider that this need of a resilient pathway is considered across government and across all levels in society. It also should be drawn on a wide level of knowledge, so a key topic of this day today. And this should not only include scientists, but also indigenous and local and also practical knowledge. It should include the conservation and the restoration of ecosystems. It should include the priorities equity and justice, and also to improve the scale-up investment of international cooperation. Looking forward for the roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina von Schuckmann, and I would like to welcome our speakers of this panel on stage. From the US, doing long-term global ocean observing, the director of the Global Ocean Monitoring and Observing Program, NOAA, David Legler, is with us. If I read LinkedIn right, she has a 10 years anniversary this September working for UNFCCC, so climate and politics are her profession. She is Chief of Section Ocean Observations and Services working at Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commissions of UNESCO. Joanna Post, welcome here. And the third, or actually fourth speaker on the panel, she's Head of Science and Climate Risk Specialist of AXA Climate Insurance. Please welcome Christelle Castet. So, you're all having a microphone. Do we miss one? Oh, maybe I should. No, we're just having some more chairs because there are some more speakers. Well, you're not next to your name, Christelle, but we'll figure out, I think. All right, so again, the panel should not be a theater we play up here. So whenever you feel like you want to ask and address a question to any of the speakers, feel free to raise your hand. We can get to the talking to you anytime. And now, actually, I would like to start with David. We heard what actually we need to do. We heard about the risk. We heard about the aims. And you're working on the global scale of providing data. What's your feeling about, like, do you have and can you provide that much data which is needed to go to the goals Karina addressed now?
Well, thanks, Christine, for the question. I think the answer is, as we heard yesterday in some of the discussions around EuroSea, is that no, we don't have enough data to answer all the questions. And every day we're getting asked more and more questions about climate, about how to respond and how to prepare for climate. So I think the evidence is pretty clear just already about what we know, that we don't have the necessary observations. We're really struggling also to connect, as we've heard from many speakers already, to connect from that observational data to a service or a product. And I think that's also an area where we need to be working more closely along that value chain to make sure that those observations are providing that value.
Can you point out special data you really say, okay, this is really missing at the moment?
Oh, sure. So there's a great example, and we've been talking this week, and we've had some meetings of the Ocean Observing Co-Design meeting, and we talk about marine heat waves and about the incredible value or the incredible impacts that these marine heat waves are having around the planet. And we're just beginning to develop the necessary products or forecasts about marine heat waves, but we're realizing already that, for example, we have a global Argo system, which is great for getting subsurface information, but it's not really adequate for providing regional depictions of the anomalies in temperatures. It doesn't go to the benthic layers in some areas that might be important, so that might be important for prediction. And so we don't have that. In terms of the response to marine heat waves, marine life observations are very poor. We don't have very many of those. And so how do we characterize and understand what the impacts of those marine heat waves are? So I think extremes are really a good area for us to begin to explore because people get it. I mean, we saw the headlines earlier this year about the marine heat waves. Glenn Nolan talked about the response in Ireland and the media and the attention that got. So I think, we should be preparing to respond to these kinds of extreme events and talking about how data and information from observations are going to enable us to better prepare and respond to these extremes.
I mean, before I lead on to Joanna about this, the question would be like, what would be needed? What do you need to be able to provide these data in the future?
more resources, and but I know we heard a lot about the resources today, this morning. I think also we need to think about the capacity. We're often, while we might have resources, we're very thin. This is largely a research-driven enterprise, and so finding the capacity in terms of the people, the expertise, is a challenge. I think opening up but to recognizing that other players can also help us, whether that be the private sector, other local communities, indigenous communities, or others can help us with some capacity development and help us in that space. And we need to bring other countries to the table.
Maybe this is actually the best sentence to lead over, bring other countries to the table. Joanna, you're talking to the nations. Do you have the feeling that they already really noticed what's necessary when you talk to them about what's going on, needed, and also be provided already?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think the simple answer to that is yes, they do notice it. The question is, what do they do about it? And there lies the challenge. There are, I think, perhaps 3 very broad points I'd like to mention in this. Earth observation is obviously the foundation of a lot of the global decision making. A lot of what we know comes from observing our planet, beautiful planet around us, or blue planet, let me hasten to add. And we cannot manage what we do not measure. That is clear, and I think people are aware of that. And the Paris Agreement, because we're talking about climate change here, so the Paris Agreement was a big paradigm shift, if you like, for science. It moved science from providing information to politicians about what is happening to a state where politicians and the Paris Agreement recognizes what is happening, but science now needs to serve those questions, which are huge ones, within that context. And within the same context, the Paris Agreement identified that countries write their nationally determined contributions. They're known as NDCs. And nations themselves identify what their priorities are, what they intend to do about climate change, and so on and so forth. And actually, within these NDCs now, and they will be revised in the next couple of years in 2025, they signal the needs and opportunities and priorities for each country. They could be used as a source to mobilize finance for those countries, but it's also a space where I've been working a lot in the last decade in identifying that those NDCs need to be blued. So those countries need to recognize that ocean is a solution space for them within their NDCs. And I think the third point is that with this paradigm shift, it shifted, and it's a very difficult paradox because science, by its very nature, is driven by research ideas that need to be followed up and published. And I think there needs to be a mindset change to respond to a lot of these huge societal challenges that we're dealing with right now, climate change being one of them, pollution, biodiversity. So we need to think now how we work as a community with our colleagues. I'm representing, I was with FCCC, I'm now representing IOC and heading up Goose now. But we work with very closely with some other UN colleagues such as WMO, but really to think about how we operationalize tools from the information to serve to the climate policy, to the decision makers, and really try and build the understanding of the opportunities within these very challenges that we face. I always have 3 points and a wish, so I'll finish, if you don't mind, those 3 points. As many of you know in the room, I've just started here as director of Goose, the Global Ocean Observing System, and I really have spent the last week with the EuroSea colleagues, really learning a lot, absorbing a lot, and I think we really have to think about the ocean observing system and the excellent work led by Tosta and others, which was a fantastic example of collaboration, coordination. So we really need to move ourselves as a family, and a very friendly family. I love working with the ocean community, to a more proactive system with open data, with clear priorities and focus that responds to these societal needs. And I'm taking this on board as I move things forward, and really to provide this sort of service-driven foundation for climate-resilient marine spatial planning. Back to you.
Thank you, Joanna, for this first input. And I'd like to ask Karina, before we come to one example, you're using a lot of data to create end-to-end products. So when you think about possible customers, one example we're going to talk about later, but who can be possible customers using the data you're providing? You mentioned something in the last sheet you had on your keynote, but maybe you can address some more.
Yes, so thank you for this question. So the variety is of course large. So I will focus my reply on climate change applications, and so I would like to come back on the major points I have highlighted during this presentation. And so one of the most emergency, I think, is in terms of adaptation. So adaptation for coastal structuration, adaptation for structures, adaptation for economic sectors, adaptation also for coastal protection, adaptation for fisheries management, sustainable use, and so there's a long list we can start to put here together, and I think the most important part is that we find a way to create ocean narratives which allow to connect the information we observed in the environment, how the environmental changes across timescales and space scales. This is starting from the long-term pressure from climate change, but there are also other pressures on the ocean. This is overexploitation, this is pollution, and but also timescales which are going down to the extremes, where we have the direct hazards which are affecting the coastal areas, but not also the coastal areas, because the ocean has also implications far away from the coast in other countries, or speaking also in terms of economies. There are also dependence with the keyword of food security, which is depending on countries which are not close to a coastal area, etc. I think these ocean narratives are very important because we have to increase awareness of the critical role of the ocean can provide, but also how sensitive the system is, and that we have to restart with these partnerships. We talked about many examples in the use of these data, the narratives, adding more knowledge systems, putting everybody together in order to find sustainable solutions, not only with the face of climate change, but in terms of our futures and future generations.
Talking about the use of the data, Christelle, you're here for insurance, AXA. You're a climate expert in this part. How does climate change and risks influence insurance risks? Like, what do you need data for, and what are you doing with it?
So I work at AXA Climate, and this team purpose is to try to help companies, large companies, but also public institution or municipality become more resilient in the face of climate change, climate risks, and also biodiversity losses. So it's a team that's dedicated to resilience and adaptation. And what we do is, on one hand, we provide parametric insurance, and it's an insurance that relies on observation and that sends payment to clients within hours when there is a climate event happening. So I can get into some examples of this. For instance, we have provided an insurance for Mesoamerican reefs. It's called MAR Fund. And this insurance is based on the fact that tropical cyclone would pass near the area, and the payout that are sent. For instance, there was one cyclone last year called Lisa in the area that the money was used for restoration. So it's a quite useful tool, parametric insurance, to have automatic payout where you can directly use the fund for resilience. We also provide insurance to companies that work in the tourism sector or also fisheries. And there is also another team at AXA Climate dedicated to adaptation. And in that area, we look into the future more. So we look at climate indicators and how they change with the climate. So extreme events, how they will become more severe, for instance, or less frequent. And this helps us provide information to companies on how to adapt. And there are, I can also have some example on that aspect if you want. For instance, if you are working on the coastline, you wonder how coastal erosion might change or how sea level rise will influence storm surge and coastal flood, and what kind of adaptation strategy you should take. That could include nature-based solution, and it's important to rely on data as fine as possible, as local as possible, to make these decisions. Also, what's important is to be able to have this kind of data on a global scale, because question comes from all over the place, and so this is quite a challenge for us, is to be able to have access to this very, very fine-scale data and very interesting data from satellite or models, but also at global scale.
Well, actually, you are looking this direction already, and you're of course nodding all the time. So you're every time also. I'm happy if you just want to answer something, but I would like to know how this collaboration works already. Are you satisfied with how it works? It did not really sound like, or that there's, in Germany we'd say air up. So
there are room for improvement, but we're very satisfied because there is already a lot of open source data, satellite information. We use Sentinel data, for instance, for parametric insurance triggers. There is already a lot of really good information out there. There is room for improvement because, of course, resolutions of models might still be not fine enough to make decisions, so there is downscaling strategy to take. There are also other models to run to understand storm surges and coastal floods. So there are additional steps to just the data, but there is already a lot of great information available, and with new indicators that were provided through this project, I think it's a really good step forward.
So you asked the question, Christine, how it's going. So our sense is, from the observing side of things, we're always trying to improve and put out more observations to improve forecasts for a number of uses. And so one of the questions I have is to the reinsurance and hazard insurance companies is, so if we can provide more observations, how we need some help to motivate within our own countries and agencies to help motivate that investment to support those observations. And so from our side, that's a mixed story, I would say. Oftentimes we don't often get that pull from the private sector or on the value of this. And so how do we improve that situation to help us all with ocean observing that benefit you?
It's quite interesting because I think traditional insurance probably relies more on claims, and once the event happen, you have to provide a payout. But for parametric insurance, we do need this kind of data, but it's still quite a niche as an insurance, but we do need a lot of data and information. So at AXA Climate, for instance, we have partnership with research institute that help us have this additional information and work done to have fine-scale data. So, for instance, we work with the university in Spain on wildfire risk modeling to go from an understanding of the weather fire index towards something that's a fire propagation, for instance. Regarding coastal risk. We work with one of your partners, it's called CLS, on having a more fine-scale information on sea level rise and have that influence coastal flood using satellite information and also in situ data. So we do have this kind of collaboration, but it's still, you're right. For us also, it's still hard to find the right scientific community and outlet to be able to have those questions answered. So there needs to be more of this communication and places where we can interact together.
This is actually what you mentioned in your keynote, Karina. Society and economy has to get closer together. I'd like to, because I'm actually looking up, my watch time is flying. Any questions from the audience yet? There's one.
Yes,
Magdalena.
It's Magdalena. Yeah, listening to the applications and how to manage risk and opportunities, it's obviously a user needs a degree of sophistication that is incredible. The normal citizen will not be able to access that information. Any of you, do you have any suggestion of how to improve, to make a very equitable society so all the citizens are able to have this information that is needed for adaptation from the single fisherman?
Yes, thank you for this question, and I think I would like to give a more generalized reply to this question. So it's one of the specific aspects where partnerships are important, where we have to all work together, also in terms of it should be science or economy, but in this case, this is, for example, experts like science and journalism and outreach activities, which will help to, on the one hand, again, raise the awareness, but also not only the awareness on the change, but also the awareness on the capacities. Which are the services, like a Copernicus Marine Service, are available to provide the data? Which are the tools which exist? We have this project here, and there had been also an immense effort in terms of communicating the science. And I think it's again through these partnerships where we have to put our forces together, our expertises together in all sectors. So to reply to a wider audience, to reply to strengthen linkages with the private sector, also the policy. I think that's the key. The partnerships is the key in order to work together to advance where we have to disseminate the information.
And I might add something, is that also at AXA Climate, we have started something 2 years ago called the Climate School, and it's designed at providing easy access information to companies, but also now municipalities, so that they can be trained on understanding what is at stake with climate change, biodiversity, and natural resources, and the ocean and water in general. So there are many information that should also be made available in a simple and accessible way. And this training has picked up quite a lot. So now, I forgot the numbers, but many companies are now trained on this information, and that also helps not just access the data, it's also understanding what it means. So yeah, that's also things like that can help.
Thank you. Yeah, communication is a huge key. Joanna, we also talked about it. David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I guess from a U.S. point of view, there's the current administration is very interested in, of course, making services and information, actionable information available to a number of communities. I think for the ocean observing community, there's some communities that I think we all recognize and want to work with that perhaps are a good avenue to start with, and that's some of the indigenous communities or localized communities in the island nations and the polar regions who, can also contribute observations and knowledge. And so they're very eager to engage in this space, but they need some help, and we need to better appreciate their contributions. Also just announced this week by the U.S. was a new initiative to develop a whole new class of workforce. It's called the Climate Corps, I think is what name it's $500 million. It's intended to strengthen our expertise and have people employed by the government to provide public services to all communities, disadvantaged or not, so they can benefit from the knowledge that we all, experience every day. So I think that's an exciting development.
Joanna, is this something we might expect in Europe as well? This sounds like a good way, but there's money set up for this. So
Real money.
It's real money.
From a European perspective, I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I can say from the UN perspective and the work under the climate change, I completely agree with the comment that capacity building is really important alongside finance, and that countries that are working towards their national adaptation plans do have funding available to develop them, but often the projects identified are not yet funded to whatever international processes are set up there. So that is a challenge. And then actually there's, for the ocean and ocean action within that space, there are a lot of projects out there. We ran an ocean climate dialogue in June earlier in Bonn, the climate change conference. And there is now on the web page, we recorded over 250, 300 ocean-based actions around climate in different countries and different areas. So there is a lot going on that's well hidden and that needs to be shared, and the good practice needs to be shared. So that comes with bringing people together. So collaboration and coordination is really key, I think, and talking to each other.
But well hidden does not really work for the future, so we have to keep on communicating. There's another question. Yes, please.
I'd just like to say first, I'm Terry McConnell. I'm the DCO lead for ocean observing in the decade. I'd just like to say I'm thrilled to see a representative of the insurance agency on the panel here. It's very interesting. The ocean science observation community, from my perspective, has been driven predominantly by scientific needs and expectations. More and more, it needs to be driven by societal needs and expectations. So a question for Christelle: how can we, our community, engage more effectively with industry sectors such as yours?
This is a very good question. I've been going to these kind of panels and asking the same question, actually. There are, I think, large European projects that could involve more private stakeholders. When you look at EU 2020 projects, there's always a scope related to stakeholders and the end users, and I think in this space we should be able to work together to design and develop solutions. That's one example, and then of course these kind of meetings are wonderful to meet, but taking measures and decisions to work together is it's still tricky. There is something called the AXA Research Fund that brings together research fundings and research centers with the AXA insurance community to build projects together. So AXA Research Fund is one of the ways to finance research projects designed for private sectors, I would say.
Okay, I was just about to ask if you're funding your own research sectors or projects, or if you're funding research which is happening already. Because this is, I don't know who said it in the panel, in the keynotes this morning, we should not duplicate too much.
Oh yeah, no, we joined European projects, like I think there is one called PISA on wildfire. So we join existing project. The only project that we would finance would be if there is nothing happening on a certain area. For instance, the work we do with CLS, looking at the very local but at broad scale sea level rise projections, there was no such things available, so we are working together on this project, but obviously we work together on, we don't try not to replicate, and very involved with the scientific community. In my team we are 8 PhDs on different fields, so we know the scientific community. We're still quite involved with them and work with them.
Thank you. Some more questions? Toste.
So we heard about climate extremes a lot today, heat waves and so on. Christelle flagged heat extremes as important for insurance, obviously. And I was wondering in the panel, how can we better adapt our observing system and forecasting system to respond to the increased frequency and intensity maybe of climate extremes in the ocean and serve that community better?
If I may, the Secretary General last year brought out this recognition of the need for an early warning systems for all initiative globally, that all nations in the country globally would be able to have early warning systems. Now, this initiative, I think, is in its early stages. It's been taken up, obviously, very much by WMO. And I think there's a very strong need for us to work closely with our colleagues at WMO and with the wider community to really focus on what that looks like for all, particularly from hazards from the ocean. I mean, WMO, of course, are talking about meteorological, hydrological hazards. We're talking about something that's also very important, that early warning systems exist. Colleagues in IOC, of course, deal with the tsunami warning. And I think there's a real space here to collaborate around providing a service and then bringing the information back in terms of the prioritization and the observation system within that context. We've heard today already about warming of the ocean, but there's others that we also need to consider in that. So there is that demand already from countries that we need to hook onto and make them realize what they actually need from the observation community to do that.
So it's a good question, Tosta, and I think, as we know, likely that the frequency and sometimes the strength or intensity of some of these extremes will likely get worse. And so as tension increases, we have to be able to respond. With regards to specifics, I think there's a good reason to try to take advantage of the current capabilities that we have. So I'm going to use Argo as another example of a system that was designed with climate monitoring primarily as its mission. The floats are all over the ocean. So the challenge is when there's an extreme event or something going on, we do have the capability to reprogram or modify their mission to have them sample the ocean more frequently, and we can navigate them to some crude approximation to do some things. So I think we could take advantage of that, but I think we also have to realize there are new capabilities being brought and new technologies being brought to the table that we can deploy perhaps more rapidly. For example, there's an experiment going on right now in the US with regards to using a number of new technologies to look at hurricanes, and they're deployed just as for one time of the year. They're gliders or automated surface vehicles like sail drones. There's all kinds of things that can be deployed by aircraft and linger in the area that are amazing and we think are going to provide some amazing benefit. So I think we have to think differently about our observing. How do we bring those technologies? How do we best organize them and design an observing system that's both stable but also one that's sort of asynchronous with how we implement them? And so I think there's a great opportunity there that we should take full advantage of. So I think we're well positioned. I also want to make a point that climate extremes don't happen just in the ocean. The ocean plays a role in atmospheric extremes like seasonal drought. And so the farmers in my country, your countries, they're dependent upon ocean information. So we have to be careful that we start tinkering and changing the ocean observing system to observe an ocean extreme. We also might be having some impact on our ability to forecast drought or extreme precipitation or other things. So we have a great challenge ahead of us. So I think it's exciting, and these kinds of messages are important for us to get out. That's a good work for us ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you want to catch up on this, Karina.
Yes, so I just compliment. So there are many things I echo, which have been already said. So I would like to repeat the point on the sustainability of the observing system with this respect. You might maybe argue for a global state estimate, we might have come far, but if we want to talk about extremes and we want to see what is the state and how will the evolution compare to be the state, when we go at regional scale, that I think is much more challenging, and there we need to go for the extremes. And then another point is in terms of, in complementary what you said, of the use of other tools like reanalysis systems, where you combine our theoretical knowledge with the models and the observation systems, on the one hand to allow for monitoring and also to build forecasts, seasonal forecasts and also 10-day forecasts, but also to benefit from these systems in order to inform the observing system what is needed, and also in terms of early warning systems to these observing system experiments also done in EuroSea, for example. So these are very critical points, but there's one critical point I would like to add as well is there's forecast, there's early warning, there's understanding of how the system will change in the future compared to the current state, but there's also need to understand how vulnerable the system already is. And then the risk will be different in different regions depending on its vulnerability. And that's, I think, the very important aspect we need to recognize as well in a long-term perspective, but also in the terms of the extremes.
Which comes back to the communication again. So one more question maybe? No? Then this is my time to address the final statements. I don't know if you want to go on, Karina? What are your wishes to the future? You said, like, the last point is, like, we have to understand the vulnerability of the system to understand what has to be protected and what we need everything for. Is this something you wish for the future?
Yes, and in particularly, I wish also that we would be able to build these partnerships across all the pillars of sustainable development and to build narratives together based on observations, on knowledge, and on skills, on needs. And also, in order to reach everybody, it would be best that they would become part of this narrative. That's the best way how to reach and to inform people, and on the one hand, but also on the other hand, to understand what the needs are and what the gaps are in order to advance on the observing system, on our tools, on the knowledge systems, and the information flow.
Yeah, we're talking about the gaps later today as well. David.
Yeah, thanks. So my vision for the future, if you will, is, or my hope for the future is that we will have a sustained and innovative observing system that can respond to many of these areas such as we're talking about today, extremes in climate. And I agree with that we need to tighten the value chain so we not only produce information, but that information becomes actionable through other actors and other parts of that value chain. And we realize the benefit through, again, continued and strengthened support for an ocean observing system.
Joanna.
I agree with my fellow panelists. But as we're talking about the climate, my wish for the future is a net zero planet as a priority, because the impacts, we're already experiencing them right now on land, in the ocean, in the atmosphere. We have a politically agreed net zero future by 2050, and I'm wishing very much that we get there. But as we get there, to strengthen the ocean observing system so that it provides the data, open data, if you like, the observational products that we need to help parties get there in a sustainable and sustained way.
Christelle, it looks like you're going to have a lot of chats after this panel here, but what would you address to the audience here today?
Of course, I'll have to second that. Mitigation and reduction of emission is net zero trajectories is the way to go. And in the meantime, we have society has to adapt. So my wish is for open source data, of course, and fine scale resolutions so that we can have the right adaptation strategy and implement this understanding of risk at local scale.
Thank you very much. The first panel, Karina von Schuckmann, David Legler, Joanna Post, and Christelle Castet. Thank you very much. Grab yourself